Hi, my name is Ben Atkinson and welcome to the Functional Health Podcast. I interview some of the leading voices in nutrition and lifestyle medicine, and I will share with you their stories, their expertise and their advice, shedding light on the industry from each of their perspectives to help improve your health from today. This week, I'm delighted to share with you my conversation with Sergey Musienko. Sergey is the CEO of Atlas Biomed, and this week we dive into the usefulness of microbiome testing and what the future of AI and the microbiome might hold. So, without further ado, Sergey, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. You know, the first time I actually heard of you and Atlas Biomed was through our mutual friends, Lisa and Alana at the Gut Stuff.
Oh, yes, they are wonderful.
Yeah, they're great. I recently did a podcast with them, or released it recently, and it was so fun. So fun. They're full of energy.
Yeah, they're amazing. We've done some stuff together, and I think we're at the event they organized at one of the tube stations. I don't remember the name right now. A couple of years ago, where we had a booth, like a presentation booth,
yes,
and we were showcasing the microbiome tests with them, and there was a lot of lectures and speakers. And one thing I remember, it was freezing cold, and I was standing there myself like all day. It was super crowded, and a lot of people, were really excited about and asking lots of questions about gut health and microbiome. But I nearly froze to death that day. But that was really fun. So,
yeah, I remember it was Old Street Station, and I think it was the back. I think it was the back end of the year, wasn't it? Like October or something. I can't remember the exact date, but
that was late autumn. It's late autumn, probably 2018, I guess.
Yeah, it would have been 2018, I think.
Wow, time flies.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. That's. I knew Lisa and Alana before that, but that was the first time I met Kimberly. They had some great speakers there,
Right.
So it was a great in terms of, for me anyway, in terms of networking.
Well, it was a great event. It was a great event.
Yeah, I hope they do something like that again because I thought.
I hope so too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be great just to start by diving into a little bit of your background because it's quite unique from what I hear. Hopefully I've not been misinformed.
Yeah. Well, I'm. The surprising thing is that I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a biologist actually. I mean, from my background comes from maths and physics, so this is what I was studying back in the university. And then at some point I switched to bioinformatics, which is like the intersection between sort of IT and programming skills and biology. So at the age of both studies, there lies this sort of area which is called bioinformatics, and this is what really got me excited at some point. And at the latest years of my education, I was doing a lot of bioinformatics studies, and then I continued that after I graduated. And then at some point, I went to a place called Singularity University in the United States, which is a place founded by Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis, great guys. Futurologists and real sort of like leaders. And Peter is also CEO and founder of a lot of exciting startups and companies. And basically, this is where I did my it's called GSP program. They call this GSP. I think they're still doing it. I hope so, because the world would lose a lot if that thing stops. And this is where I got the idea, to start Atlas and apply the bioinformatics skills to create products, that will that will somehow impact everyday lives of people, and basically translate the science into something tangible that you can use as the consumer. So basically apply all the knowledge, in certain areas, specifically related with health and nutrition, into like a real world product, which will impact people's lives. So this is the grand idea behind Atlas at way back when. And here we are, ended with two tests on the market, which are doing exactly this thing. So sort of turning the power of bioinformatics and genomics, and microbiome research into sort of something that you can do regularly, and as a easy to use super friendly sort of product.
Yeah.
So
No, microbiome testing is something which has hugely fascinated me. And I've done my genetic testing through 23andMe and actually plugged it through, what's the other one called? DNA Fit, I think it's called.
yep.
And another one called Strategene, which is Ben Lynch's program. So like I run it through loads of stuff basically to understand exactly what my methylation pathways are, and what I'm predisposed to. Basically, it's quite boring actually. My genetic test, not predisposed to much. So
Well, there's a reasoning behind that. I mean, many people call DNA tests not really actionable. Well, actually, I mean, the reason behind that is that this is the test that, I mean, does not get, I mean, you don't test yourself in dynamics. So there's no point of testing yourself, 2 or 3 times or, every month, because your DNA doesn't really change. Well, I'm talking about, the general pattern of DNA, which you get from saliva tests. I'm not talking about, cancer or anything else. So, and when there's no dynamics, when there's no sort of, change in the parameter that you're monitoring, that means there's no impact. There's no impact, the effect of which you can monitor. And that means there's no sort of actionable, intervention that you can recommend to the person and then measure its effect. So unlike this kind of approach, this issue with the DNA, microbiome is of course a whole other story. When, I mean, this is something that not only is dynamic, but this is something you can affect. By changing diets, by adding prebiotics. I mean, we'll talk more about this, of course, but
100%.
This is, that's one of the issues. When people say, well, I don't feel a lot of actionability from my test results. Well, of course, I mean that's why. I mean, because this is one-off test. I mean, you're supposed. Well, you've done 3 tests, but ideally, you should do the test once, of course, and ideally this should be a whole genome, but that's a whole other story. I mean, again, right now we're not doing the whole genomes, so. The tests and the technology Atlas or other, most of other companies are using, it's called microarray. It's not actually monitoring your whole genome. So yeah, at some point, as technology develops and the price on it and the price on sequencing drops, I would expect you to probably do another DNA test for your whole genome.
Yeah, I mean, I just took my raw data from the original 23andMe test and put it through these different programs, right? And look at like the crossover in between SNPs and things like that, what they look at, because they're all just slightly different, which is super, super interesting. But you're right, it's only a snapshot, and it doesn't take into account things like epigenetics in your environment. Right. And what it does do is bring up more questions, so you can like probe a little bit. So if I think if you have a mutation in the MTHFR, for example, you can like look, well, what's my B vitamin status like? And you can measure that. And you can have a look, methylation pathways and things like that. So you can work with a practitioner and, dive a little bit deeper, which I think is really beneficial in long term, especially if you have a condition and you're not really sure where to go with it.
Well, I think, I mean, I personally think, and of course Atlas is doing the DNA test as well, besides the microbiome, there's a huge potential behind, knowing all that information. And I actually believe it's going to be an essential part of, our, daily lives for all the people. I mean, as we move forward. So I would probably say that all your like electronic health record would start with, doing your own DNA. And I mean, this will be like page 1, of your personal health sort of report. I mean, we're not there yet, of course, and not everyone's, been sequenced or genotyped. We'll get there. I mean, when I'm saying it's not, the information does not seem actionable sometimes, it does not mean it's useless. I mean, it's extremely valuable and provides a huge, a large volume of insight into your predispositions or, your career status, which might be extremely important if you're, planning to have kids. It just, it just opens up, new doors and new information about yourself, which you cannot learn in any other way. So, which I think should be essential part of, your personal knowledge. So like you're wearing an Oura ring, right? Yeah. Or, you're wearing a Fitbit bracelet. So in same story here. I mean, it's just another angle of your overall holistic health, which I believe in the future is going to be an essential part of, our knowledge about ourselves. So we'll get there. I mean, we're slowly, and actually, I wouldn't even say slowly, but I mean, we're getting there.
Yep, it's only a matter of time.
Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of the microbiome testing, I mean, this is another area which is obviously extremely fascinating. And still, you know, it is almost, I know there's so thousands of papers published every single year, but it's still like an almost an emerging science, because there's so much that we do know, but also so much that we don't know as well, in terms of how these bacteria interact with each other and how they interplay with fungi and things like that. How did you get into this? And how, like, was there a certain health ailment which you had, which you were like, I need to look into this further?
Well, that was I mean, one of the first sort of founding stones behind Atlas was that we were trying to create a sort of a and develop a holistic approach towards personal individual health and nutrition. And since the very beginning, we had this idea of, rather than doing one product, instead of this, we wanted to create a more of a holistic approach for looking into our customers' health and providing information back to them. So we were trying to sort of empower people from different sides, not just from learning from their genomes, but it's rather aggregating different data sets around each individual customer, helping him or her to empower by knowing more about themselves from different sides. And I believe it's when we talk about health or nutrition, like things you should or should not be eating, or your health risk predispositions, it's always multifactorial. So it's sort of it's always a holistic area which has to be combined like a puzzle, with from different pieces, which has to be combined together to give a whole overview of the subject. So that's the idea we had behind Atlas. So we wanted to be, rather than a company that's only doing DNA tests or only doing microbiome tests, we wanted to be the company that's aggregating all these different data sources, combining that, and then providing, individualized, personalized advice or recommendation on how to improve your lifestyle.
Has it benefited you?
Myself personally?
Yeah.
Well, I was the first client. Well, I can tell you, I benefit from both tests. Well, with DNA test, that's sort of an interesting insight into my personal health. Well, I have mutation in BRCA1 gene, which greatly affects risks of breast cancer. In men, prostate cancer, of course, which can be passed on to my children. It runs in my family. And it's really important to know this information. So you can, like, for example, I screen myself regularly, knowing this, for prostate cancer. And with the microbiome test, I do that test regularly, actually. And for example, I had an episode about a year ago when I was taking quite a strong course of antibiotics. And then I was monitoring my microbiome before that, in the middle of taking the course, and then right after. And I was doing some stuff, to basically restore the balance in my microbes right after the course, because I suffered greatly, and I had some health issues after that, after the antibiotics. So I was using the results of the test to basically sort of help myself restore the balance in gut bacteria.
Okay, so first of all, sorry to hear that you were sick and had to take antibiotics, and I'm glad you're better now. But how did that affect, I guess, your gut microbiota diversity?
Oh, that lowered. That just dropped. So
just the total population diversity, everything, would it just come crashing down?
Yes. Well, that's the first thing you see when you're on the course of antibiotics is, most of the time the diversity of your bacteria just drops significantly. And then restoring that, because basically that's one of the main factors of healthy microbiome, is how diverse that is, because the more different types of bacteria you have, basically that creates the abundance of functions that these bacteria play, which means that whenever something changes in the ecosystem where all these bacteria live, and let's say one type of bacteria gets wiped out, if you have the abundance of functions, the other bacteria can take over, performing this function. that is beneficial to yourself as the host of those bacteria. So the more diverse microbiome you have, someone have, the better. That's the general rule.
Yes.
So when I was taking the antibiotics a year ago, that's the first thing I noticed, after taking the test during the course, was that my microbiome diversity dropped significantly. To almost the lowest, one of the lowest levels we have, in our cohorts of our people. And restoring that was quite an issue. It took me a while, basically, to get the diversity back to normal. It took me about 6 months, I would say.
Okay, because there are papers showing that you'll get back to, say, quote unquote, air quotes, say, normal by yourself, but just by eating a normal everyday diet. However, I think there's a difference between, getting the same amount of bacteria in terms of a population within your gut, and then having an optimal microbiome, which means, is it as diverse as it was before? Is there bacteria there which shouldn't be? For example, do you have dysbiosis due to the antibiotics? And it'd be interesting to know if you have any plans in the future to look at this, how antibiotics actually affect the repopulation of the gut.
There's lots of studies on this, and of course, antibiotics is one of the strongest sort of interventions you can have on the microbiome and the bacteria in the gut. Well, in my case, what was interesting, I was interested in restoring the diversity of my microbiome back to the level I had before taking the antibiotics. So that was the goal for me. And yes, it will get to normal most of the time. Although, of course, there are quite severe cases, after taking antibiotics. That's why it should be prescribed by the doctors. So it's not something you should be taking and just yourself, because there still are countries where you can purchase antibiotics in just pharmacies, and this should be prescribed by the doctor. That's the point. Most of the time, the bacteria, the balance in bacteria is restored by itself, because from the food you're eating, from the pre and probiotics you're taking with the food. But in my case, I was interested to restoring it to the high levels which I used to have before, and that was the thing I managed to do, but it took me quite a while.
Yeah, and just to touch on something that you said around antibiotics, natural supplements can equally have an effect on the microbiome that maybe not as strong, but things like oil of oregano and there's certain herbs which can be particularly potent. And if someone has a certain health condition, they can be beneficial, but they can also have a detriment as well, especially if you don't know what you're doing. So like I always say to everyone, before you start messing around with your microbiome, probably best to speak to a health professional or practitioner first. One thing I wanted to ask you about as well is the microbiome test itself. It'd be interesting to think, does it benefit people with IBS, for example, or IBD? And maybe not the microbiome test in particular, but do you think analyzing microbiomes overall would help empower people to take control of their own health?
Well, I think the knowledge about yourself, always has a potential to empower yourself, making the better and more informed decisions, because it just provides an extra layer of information for yourself. One thing that's important to say is that that most of the microbiome, when we're talking about microbiome tests based on, let's say, bacteria sequencing, such as the ones that we are doing, none of them are diagnostic at the moment. So it's not meant to diagnose IBS or IBD. At some point you can. Of course, you should be using the results of the test and taking that back to the health professional, and trying to basically combine the knowledge you get from the microbiome testing with the current actual information about your health and your existing conditions, if there are any, and then of course any recommendations should be taken after consulting the health professional. But my personal view is that basically microbiome, as I said, as we were discussing about the DNA test before, I think at the end it just creates this extra layer of information about your own health that you cannot get in any other way, and that's I mean, that's the thing that can, basically empower your health decisions and make you help you make better lifestyle decisions and change your health to the better when used wisely.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now it is just bacteria. It's not parasites or fungi or things like that. Is that correct?
Well, our test is based on technology which is called 16S NGS sequencing. So that 16S here means this is a very specific gene which is present in bacteria. That's the name of the gene, 16S. That means we're not monitoring, we're not sequencing the fungi or viruses or parasites. So it's only the bacteria. There might be other ways, other tests which are looking for more. Like there are, like, for example, things that which use shotgun, what's called shotgun sequencing.
Yes.
That means just sequencing all the DNA that comes with the sample, including all of those things that that we listed before. The issue with those tests is that it's still quite expensive. So it's I would say there's a pricing issue because, well, although the technologies of sequencing, the NGS technologies are dropping down in pricing every year, it still comes at a high price to sequence all the DNA within the sample. So I would say that's the main limiting factor, and most of the tests which are looking into microbiome right now are using the 16S as sort of the gold standard for analyzing the bacteria, because it does provide a pretty high resolution in terms of which types of bacteria are present and in which proportion in the sample.
Okay. Right, I understand. And in terms of what you would consider a good microbiome, I remember speaking to Miguel about this, and he was saying it would be something to do with the ratio of bacteria within the gut. And I would be interesting to wonder how that actually works in practice, because I guess one thing which I'm interested in is you can have a diverse microbiome, but that be different depending on where you live, and also different between people. For example, twins can have what you'd maybe consider a healthy microbiome, but the actual diversity of the species in terms of how many there are, so you might have more bifidobacterium than the other, but they're equally healthy. So it's just wondering how an AI, and this might be a difficult question to answer, can tell you whether you have a healthier microbiome than another person if they are both perceivably healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, just to start with, if you compare two random people, an interesting fact is that their DNA is about 99% identical, and their microbiome would be, well, on average about 20 to 30% identical, and then everything else will be different. So the microbiome, the ratio of all these bacteria type really varies from individual to individual. So even if you take the twins, which are quite genetically identical, it is, most of their bacteria will be different, because there's a basic lifestyle. What it means is that lifestyle plays a huge and important role into into the balance of bacteria that you carry with yourself, which is extremely exciting, interesting, and which also means another point, that it basically can be changed. So and it can be impacted. So first of all, yes, the cultural aspects of the place where you live in, or the family where you live in, the geography, whether it's a large city or rural area, does play a huge role on your bacteria. An interesting story, I can tell, for example, is I grew up as a kid. I grew up in Russia, and it was, let's say, 1980s. And an interesting fact is that culturally, in Russia, people were always having a lot of fermented foods. So basically, that we were eating this all the time. Things that are only getting popular, across UK. Well, let's say kombucha. Well, it's been quite a while, popular for quite a while now. But I can tell you that when I was a kid, my grandma always, kept this. We used to call it the tea mushroom, which was basically
the Scooby, right?
Yes, which is basically the kombucha in our fridge all the time. And I mean, as a kid, I mean, I was drinking this as a, just like regular tea. I mean, it was. I mean, we were drinking it all the time. Same story with kefirs.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something I just grew up with naturally, and that's a totally cultural thing because, well, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I mean, it was extremely popular back when I was a kid. And it seems like these things are coming back to us, in terms of how gut health in general, and having kefirs and probiotics, and fermented foods, and then kombucha. I mean, us just realizing now. I mean, basically, to me, this seems like reopening. I mean, what was already happening with me way back when I was a kid. So yes, things like this are extremely important, and they they differ, from one geographic region to another, from one family to another. Whether you're, as I said, live in a big city, having a what's called Western diet, with the fast foods, who really are proven to lower the microbiome diversity, or you live in a family where you basically drink kombucha and kefir every day, thus basically promoting healthy bacteria in your gut. Things like this differ a lot, but they also create a huge potential for for shaping up the balance of your microbiome, which is, of course, should always be done carefully. So my best advice would be to not rush into doing changes and testing things on yourself. But I would always say try to make informed decisions, and then try to take it slowly rather than making huge changes in a short period of time.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And it also makes sense that people, because they have different fermented foods depending on geolocation, why the bacterial diversity might be different. Because even if you take kefir, for example, water kefir is a very different microbial profile than the ones in dairy in terms of lactic acid, bacteria, etc. And also, every fermentation is also different, so that's something to note as well. What was the other thing that I was going to mention about?
Well, I think you mentioned the AI as well.
Yes.
Well, yeah, AI is a tricky thing. I mean, first of all, parts of almost all the microbiome studies now involve, the elements of machine learning algorithms, because this is there are already certain pipelines. Coming back to bioinformatics, there are pipelines already quite established which show the efficiency of analyzing cohort level data on microbiome. So let's say you're trying to identify, certain markers in microbiome which can predict certain conditions like IBD or IBS.
Yes. Okay.
That basically means you have several cohorts of people. Let's say you have cohort of people, healthy individuals, people with who have the IBD, and then you're measuring the microbiome and bacteria composition in both cohorts. So there's an elements of ML which are already used. It's sort of becoming a general practice, I would say, in microbiome analysis. Whenever we use huge data sets, and actually that also relates not only for microbiome but for DNA tests as well. Whenever you have a huge data sets, let's say you have information about genomes, which are hundreds of thousands of parameters for one individual, and you have hundreds of thousands individuals, comparing that, the 100,000 parameters for hundreds of thousands of people is almost impossible, without the help of, ML and complex algorithms and pipelines. So it's not something the doctor can do. It's not something, or analyst can do, just, putting up a Excel spreadsheet and,
Can you hear that?
I can hear some noise.
So for the listeners at home, if you can hear a mild buzzing, that is literally a hole being drilled through a wall next door. So apologies for that, but hopefully it'll be short-lived. So sorry, Sergey, I interrupted you when you were talking about the AI.
No, but so what I was saying is that first of all, we are already using the elements of AI and machine learning in studies for microbiome and genetics when we compare large cohorts of samples one with another, and we're looking for the correlations between those cohorts. So even the tests we're doing right now are using those elements of machine learning to predict some of the outcomes for the as part of the microbiome test reports. So the future, I would say the future is already, we are already there. It's impossible to imagine the world without, especially the healthcare, the future healthcare without using AI or ML, simply because the data sets we are operating with are already impossible to get, to be analyzed by the doctor analyst. Mm-hmm. So simply you just simply cannot open a spreadsheet and put the data there, to manually analyze this, because none of the data will fit the spreadsheet. So a single whole genome, let's say, is 100 gigabytes of data for just one individual. So it's just impossible to be analyzed by manually.
So something that would be really good to touch upon is the real life benefits for people doing a microbiome test. Because some people might be sitting at home and thinking, well, I feel pretty good. Why should I get a microbiome test? What are the benefits of me doing that?
Well, unless things are really out of balance, you don't necessarily feel that something might be, wrong or not really balanced with your gut bacteria. So, for example, you don't really feel that you're missing a certain strain of bacteria, in your microbiome. There's no nerves or neural cells, for identifying that. So you don't really feel that unless you do a test. You cannot really measure it. So let's say someone's interested in taking probiotics, hoping to improve their, gut bacteria and gut bacteria balance. So probably one of the, I would say a more reasonable thing would be to first test your microbiome and then see what's missing, and then make a, rational sort of decision based on the knowledge of your current microbiome state. So I would say, like, again, empowering your lifestyle decisions, I would say probably the most like the number one point for that. Again, learning more about how your bacteria is related with the food you take, with your current diet, whether you are in or out of balance, with the gut bacteria, and maybe testing some interventions which you might be interested in, which again I should underline should be done carefully and ideally together with the doctor. And then driving the science. Another good point. By taking microbiome, actually, one of the things you're doing is you're pushing the science forward. The more data there is, and the more science we can do.
Yeah, data seems to drive everything at this point. One of the things which I thought was really interesting is just because I have experience with your test, and it made me very aware of the kind of diversity of foods that I was eating. So in terms of, I realized that when I was eating like my normal diet, even though it's very, very varied, I stick to the same varied foods, if that makes sense. So I eat probably 50 different vegetables and fruits, likely in a two week span. However, they're the same. Like, I don't really deviate from that. I don't try something necessarily that new. I might try a new recipe with a different spice, but it's not necessarily with a different food. Just like having recommendations of, like, for example, including gooseberries in my diet, which is not something I would ever eat, makes me think, oh, well, there is a whole variety of foods out there which I can include to increase the diversity in my gut microbiome.
Taking 50 different types of vegetables and fruits, that's a lot. That probably pushes you to the end of the spectrum in terms of, the amount of people who are having, and the diversity of, their diets. So I would say you're doing pretty well. But most of the people, when it comes to, eating vegetables and fruits, we see a lot of customers who believe they eat a lot of vegetables and fruits in grams, in volume. But sort of you start investigating, like what's the diversity of that. It turns out, I mean, they eat the same types of salads in the same places, almost, which, I mean, drastically limits, I would say, the diversity of fibers that you're consuming, which limits the diversity of food that your bacteria is taking, and thus limits the diversity of bacteria themselves. I mean, there are several very interesting exercises and very quite simple exercises on how to find food. I mean, there's what's called Eat the Rainbow challenge, which basically means trying to eat the same, the full spectrum of colors of vegetables and fruits every day, and try to feel in, all the sort of colors in the rainbow of the food that you're taking daily. The other one is trying to calculate, like you did, how many different types of vegetables, fruits you're eating, let's say, during the week. And I would say 50 is quite a good number. So you're doing quite a good job.
Thank you, Sergey.
No, honestly, that's pretty well done. Yeah. So that of course, all of that results, and affect your bacteria. So I mean, based on that, you would always want to sort of, looking at your results, for taking microbiome test, you would always want to sort of, correlate that with your like day-to-day diet and see how things correlate. There's a lot of interesting insights that you might find.
My experience was, like, when I did the test, I realized I didn't have any bifidobacterium, and that was something which is really interesting, because I've read a great deal about the microbiome in preparation for many interviews, including this one, and kind of trying to understand what level of bacteria an optimal microbiome would have, and what bacterial strains and species are important. And bifidobacterium are like one of the ones which, enhance butyrate production, which is like one of the main substrates for the cells in the microbiome to kind of help them proliferate and maintain integrity of the gut wall. And then you have also B vitamin production, so energy production from food.
Yes.
So when I realized I had none of this, I was like, right, this is something targeted, which I can take away and actually implement. So I actually found that extremely useful. I mean, I have no idea whether the kind of interventions I'm doing are going to be efficacious or not. We'll see further down the line, right? But that is something I found really interesting and empowering in a way, that I could do a test, realize what I was absent in, and then make conscious decisions to change that.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely correct. And that's the whole point of testing. That's as we see that, making, being more aware on how the food you're taking, how your diet actually affects your gut health. So, and that's the whole point of taking the test multiple times. Also monitoring how certain interventions, like taking a probiotics, like in your case, which again could be targeted, probably increases the efficiency of the and increases the chances that the bifidobacterium might find a place within the ecosystem of your other bacteria in your gut. But then again, measuring that intervention, how whether this change happened or did not happen. So that's the whole point of testing yourself multiple times, which we're really trying to pursue. And we're explaining to people that kind of sort of it's good to do the test one time, but then of course it's much more valuable when you track your progress in dynamics, especially when you combine that with certain interventions.
Yeah. Absolutely. And also the kind of variety of food, which is still interesting me. So where do you think the future of microbiome test will be? Because I know your background's in bioinformatics and AI, and I'm wondering how you think this is going to progress in the near future.
Well, I think it's going to progress in several directions. So first of all, we will increase the number of things we're looking at when we're doing the microbiome test. So let's say right now we're only looking at bacteria. With the Atlas microbiome test, we're only doing what's called 16S sequencing, which reveals the bacteria present within the sample. So we're not looking at viruses or fungi or which might be interesting.
Parasites, I guess, would be another one.
Right. So first of all, increasing the number of parameters monitored by the microbiome test. That's one thing. And then sort of, let's say one of the solutions here is switching to shotgun sequencing, which sort of covers the entire DNA present within the sample, not just one gene, which we are looking at this moment. The only limitation here right now is the price. So, I mean, the shotgun sequencing is just too expensive for the retail sort of mass market product. I mean, that's what I believe. However, we see that the price for sequencing is going down at the same time. Then this is the second point. So as the price go down, we'll see more things tested, and we'll get more information about more details about the types of bacteria, but also the other microorganisms which are present. In your gut, and we'll have more data to find new correlations and make more precise, diagnostics and predictions. So, plus, as we aggregate more and more data, we'll have more knowledge on how, these microorganisms, whether it's a bacteria or viruses or something else, how that affects your health, your metabolism, your inflammation, your neurodegenerative disease. How that affects, like your mood, let's say, or, problems with sleep. There's a lot of things which are, correlated. They are, we know they are correlated. We know they are related, but we might be lacking some data yet. So as we aggregate more data, which comes after the price on sequencing goes down and more people are interested in taking such tests, we'll see more and more knowledge, coming out of those tests, which is sort of a closed loop. It's a positive closed loop. So inevitably, microbiome testing will become part of the routine, medical practice. And we will do this as regularly as we do the blood tests. And this will be just, a normal practice of your GP. So when you come with a certain problem, you'll have the microbiome test prescribed. I think we will get there inevitably. Right now there's a lot of things we don't know, a lot of things, and the microbiome space is very exciting but emerging area. So there are things that we are trying to. We are now understanding. Quite well, I would say, but there's of course things where we see a huge potential, but we just don't have enough data, or it just requires us some more time, to figure out what's the causality, not just the correlation, but trying to figure out the causality of what we see.
That makes a lot of sense. And just to add on what we just spoke about, I've seen papers and they've been looking at the link between certain upregulation of certain bacteria and the links between like autism to autoimmune disease.
Right.
So the actual use of this hasn't been fully quantified yet. We don't know. So, and it could be hugely extensive. So I think it's a hugely exciting area.
Yes.
And is relatively new. No one was talking about it 30 years ago, and now there's tens of thousands of papers published every single year. So
what I remember, probably 7 to 10 years ago, when you went to a conference, like scientific one, when you went to a medical conference and you were presenting something about microbiome, that could have been considered, I would say, radical, or something like, uncommon, I would say. These days, on any conference you take, any specialization of medical conference, you'll hear reports about microbiome and how this is correlated with, with our body and with our organs, with the disease. There's a lot of knowledge coming in, and actually, what's one of the things which are, really exciting for me to see is how much this whole knowledge and this research is being driven by the crowdfunding, by the community, and by people who are actually taking the test, who participated in things like American Gut Project,
yes,
which were totally crowdfunded, and we did some of those projects in Russia as well. So we at some point we did a crowdsourcing research. Which is the results of which were then published, which is extremely exciting. People are willing to participate and then learn about themselves, but at the same time share their results, sort of inputting that into the advancements of science. And that thing I find extremely fascinating and really exciting in this area. So I think we will see more things like this, and more people who are willing to share. I mean, again, this is not something we require, or this is not something we're sort of pushing to, but to those people who are interested in this, I think there will be more and more sort of crowdsourced projects where you can input your real life data and then help advance science. So, which does seem very exciting.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the last three questions I ask everyone that comes on the show, with the first being, what is the most impactful health change that you have made in your life, and why?
All right, that's an interesting one. I think, in terms of my health, the most impactful thing was founding the company. I think, that gave me a lot of new gray hair. But at the same time, it just drives my interest. And it so happened that the company that I founded, have impacted not just my personal health, by which was impacted by just using our products, but also the health of many other people, which to me is really exciting. And that just keeps me up 14-15 hours a day working on improving our products. But as you can see, I'm getting bolder.
Well, you did cut all your hair off, so I think that's one of the reasons why.
But still, that is to hide the gray hair, actually. That was the one. That was the thing.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, and a really interesting one, actually. My second one is, how do you think healthcare, and you've kind of answered this already, but if you have a different take on it, it'd be great. How can healthcare become more integrated with some of the modalities that we spoke about today?
I think inevitably this will happen. As I already said, it is all driven by technological development. So, and as the source technology of DNA sequencing or DNA analysis goes forward, dropping the price, that makes the product more accessible to not only people, but also to the medical community, to the doctors, nutritionists across the world, which in turn results in aggregating more data for the scientific community, which drives new research and new advancements in the research, and then also finding new correlations or new traits, to report back to the patients and their doctors. So, with this positive feedback loop, I think the main factor is the technological development. So, I think the engineers who stand behind, developing new sequencers, new reagents, which are less expensive, which provide more coverage, who create new microprocessors in the computers, which allow the bioinformaticians like us to analyze those hundreds of gigabytes of data coming out from each test. This is what drives this whole industry. That's the core thing that drives the industry. That's what I believe. And this is great. So I think I think in time, and I think this is going to be a very relatively short period of time. Things we've discussed today, such as analyzing your whole genome at birth, maybe, or doing regular microbiome checks. I will just see that as a normal, everyday routine. Which people won't even question. It would be just like taking a breakfast. Why would you ask questions about about whether or not somebody had a breakfast? So things like this will become a routine.
That'd be interesting if you're doing a microbiome test daily and it just becomes like breakfast. That'd be
could be.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, we could end up with the smart toilets, who just analyze things as they go.
That would be amazing. Because because there are changes. I mean, I'm going to digress here, so I will get to the final question. But you can change your microbiome within a day just by having like a lot of fermentable fibers or resistant starches. And I always thought like it would be interesting if you could sequence it relatively fast to see exactly what the changes were. Because right now it takes 4 to 6 weeks sometimes to get a, depending on the lab. But yeah, fascinating. Anyway,
not there yet, but.
No.
Let's talk again in a couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. And my last question, but I've got one more question. But before I ask it, can you please tell the listeners where they can find you and what exciting projects you have coming up?
Sure thing. Well, you can learn more about Atlas and what we do at atlasbiomed.com, and all information about microbiome and DNA tests we do. It's just there. So. Please find us. You can also find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, and I'll be super, super happy to chat.
Perfect. And I will link to all of Sergey's social media and links in the show notes. Sergey, can you please provide the listeners with 3 quick tips to help improve their health and well-being from today?
Well, as we spoke mostly about microbiome, I'll just focus on that if you don't mind. So yeah, I would say, first of all, try to limit the bad stuff. By bad stuff, I mean fast foods, lots of salt. So all the hamburgers, Coke, even the Diet Coke, probably, should go away. Then try to look at the amount of fibers you're taking, because there's a devastating statistics that the average British person is only taking about half of the recommended amount of fibers. So out of 30 grams a day, we're only taking 15 at best. And it's really hard to understand, how many fibers is there, in something that you eat. So, one of the things, I did personally was I was just Googling, the amount of fibers in things I ate during the day. Let's say an apple or banana. You just Google the amount of fiber that is there, and then summed it up. And it was, and I was super surprised, how low was the amount of fibers that I ate. And actually, one of the other exercises we did is we tried to sort of collect the basket, like we put a basket on several baskets on the table, and we were just putting things until there's like 30 grams of fibers contained in them within the basket. And that's a lot of things you have to eat.
Yeah,
so it's a lot of things you have to eat. So, but also and the third thing is diversifying that. So it's as we discussed. It's not just how many fibers you eat, but it's also which of course makes it more complicated. It's also the diversity of different types of fibers, which you consume and which feed up your microorganisms in your gut. So, they do diversify it. Take different products of different colors. Try to calculate how many types of vegetables and fruits you eat, and then sort of play a game, with yourself, trying to increase this amount. And so all these are sort of 3 basic advice, I would say, might and will improve your diversity of your gut bacteria.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for sharing those. Sergey, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I've really enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot. And I do hope that we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Functional Health Podcast. You can find links to everything that we talked about today in the show notes. If you have a second, please consider leaving a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does make a huge difference and helps get this valuable information out and reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date and know whenever I release a new episode. You can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, and all questions are welcome. As always, thanks to Josh Aurelia for the editing and Alan Harper for his support.